Welcome to Chromodiversity, a podcast for clinicians, therapists, and families about common genetic diversity. Hi, I'm Elliot Pollack, and I'll be your host. In this episode, you'll hear the first part of a conversation with Ric Clark from Edinburgh in Scotland. Ric studied theology at the University of St Andrews and holds an advanced diploma in accounting and business. He's a successful data modeler at one of the UK's leading home builders and has a passion for telling stories with images, sound, and text. Ric also happens to have an extra 47th Y chromosome, sometimes called double Y or Jacobs. You're a former rugby player and you still compete in track, road, and cross-country races. What was your last race, Ric?
Well, just before I got COVID in July, I won the 800 metres at the Scottish Masters Championships for the age group category 45 to 49.
Wow, congratulations. You're a neurodiversity advocate and founding member of the Octopus movement, as well as Scotland ambassador for My XXY Chromodiversity Foundation. You also happen to have an extra 47th Y chromosome, a non-hereditary genetic variation that occurs in about 1 in 1,000 males. Ric, how old were you when you found out you have an extra Y chromosome? And how exactly did you find out?
Sure. So I was 39 at the time. My wife and I had been trying to have a baby, and I guess we were going through kind of multiple tests and stuff like that. And they suddenly cropped up, or it popped up that I had this extra Y chromosome. I mean, the way that it was kind of brought, fed to me, or we were told about it, we were kind of invited along to a meeting and it was explained to us. I mean, my wife at the same time was kind of told that she didn't have a lot of eggs being produced, because in fact we didn't actually end up having our own child, although we adopted a boy at a later date. And they just said, kind of by the by, you have an extra Y chromosome. But we weren't given a whole lot of information any more than that at the time.
How did it make you feel when you found out?
Initially, we weren't very sure what to make of it. I mean, you try and do your own research as much as you can, and I mean, I'm certainly an avid Googler, so to speak, and I often find that with looking things up on the internet, that you've got to have a few stabs at it, try a few different searches, because you never get the complete story. And certainly, one of the first things that I had discovered was that a lot of boys growing up with 47XYY might have a couple of learning difficulties. And for me, this was a sudden kind of piece of the jigsaw that I had been looking for a while. I mean, I had been diagnosed with ADHD as a 36-year-old, although I had tried previously to get that diagnosis when I was 28. But for many years in the UK, you couldn't get that diagnosis as an adult. I mean, it was a big piece of the puzzle because apparently no one else in my family seemed to suffer from any other alleged impairments or neurodifferences, shall we say, rather than actual impairments. I mean, if you don't mind me talking about the research side of things or my own research, I mean, some of the stuff that I initially found out was not necessarily terribly helpful. And I've discovered that in certain countries I might have been aborted as a fetus. I also discovered that the first test that was done on a kind of population where they were looking at the certain data for people with my chromosome diversity or microdiversity was that they made some link to violent crime, violent offenders, even serial killers who have 47XYY. And so they wrongly made this presumption that that's what it was, like some kind of serial killer gene or something that had suddenly been found. And the reason why this was wrong is because of the fact that, first of all, the data that they were actually using was a prison population. So it wasn't a broad enough cross section of society, and has been subsequently debunked several
Yes.
times over. But
You mentioned neurodiversity, and some recent research also seems to show that having an extra Y does create somewhat higher likelihood of having traits that are associated to ADHD, as well as dyslexia or dyspraxia. So that's not a myth there. Neurodivergence does seem to have a genetic element here, not in all people. Was that something that you found in your research as well?
it definitely is. I mean, I have more recently been diagnosed officially now as autistic as well. So that's just recently happened 2 months ago. Well, I went through a process and then they confirmed that I was autistic too. I mean, I self-diagnosed myself as dyspraxic. It was always seen as people who were not terribly coordinated, and that was pretty much it. Now, I've played a lot of sports, but as many people would probably argue, I wouldn't say that my catching ability was innate from the start, and I certainly had to work very hard at it. I mean, I also have astigmatism in my eyes, which means depth perception is quite challenging at times, and it's more kind of guesswork than anything else. But the other thing is, well, there's a couple of other flags that interested me about dyspraxia that I wasn't aware of until I read an article by a journalist, female journalist, who's from the UK originally, but she writes in America for Marie Claire magazine. And she, for example, was pointing out that a lot of people who are dyspraxic don't have a preferred hand to use. So I'm left-handed and right-handed, and I used to play cricket. I bowl left-handed, but I throw right-handed with the cricket ball. I can write with both hands. Not that there's a lot of cause for shooting, but I used to do like cadets when I was at school, and I was naturally a left-hander, but I can also shoot right-handed. And because a lot of the cadet rifles were aimed
Wait a minute, Rick.
right-handers.
Sorry to interrupt. A lot of what you're saying here, these don't sound like impairments. These sound like strengths.
Yeah, I suppose they are. They are. But if you see my handwriting, you can see that it's not necessarily a strength.
I would put that down to self-deprecating humor. And that also, people would say, oh, someone who's autistic doesn't necessarily have a sense of social interaction or humor as other people, but you've just demonstrated the opposite.
Well, I suppose, yeah, that's certainly a perception that holds true to stereotype, but isn't actually accurate at all. I mean, I think that I'm not very good with social cues, and when in a kind of office environment, for example, we have, what is referred to here as banter, maybe called different things in different countries. I don't do very well in that situation because I don't move quickly enough. My brain doesn't process the information fast enough. And also I probably have a bit of a problem with my filter, so that sometimes if I think I'm quick enough to come out with something, I might come out with something and it's not quite appropriate.
Many people with a genetic variation say they felt somewhat different from other kids growing up. Was that your case? Did you feel different?
I was always a little bit, I don't know, quiet at the time and a little bit timid. I definitely felt, in some respects, I felt like I almost had a mature brain, in that I accepted a lot of realities that a lot of my peers didn't. They all wanted to go and do all the traditional things that boys and girls do, and I found that I didn't necessarily. A lot of things just didn't interest me. But yeah, I mean, I have to say, growing up was pretty challenging for different reasons. I, was bullied quite a lot growing up in primary school and a little bit in the beginning of high school. It was a difficult time negotiating that whole process.
It sounds like you had a good perception, social perception of other people, but that you were perhaps a little bit shy and didn't interact maybe as much. But it doesn't sound like you didn't understand what was happening around you at all.
I mean, I think I probably reflected a lot more than my peers did. And probably because of in the moment, I probably didn't do things very well. So then I spent a lot of time either chastising myself or reacting to people's chastisement of me. I mean, my father and I fought significantly growing up, and I have two older siblings who, as far as I'm aware, don't have any chromosome diversity, and they both did extraordinarily well in their chosen fields growing up. They, were both kind of like top of the class, incredibly good at anything they tried. So it meant that there was a constant comparison taking place growing up because of the things that I was not very good at. So I guess I did a lot of reflection.
You were talking about some of the challenges that you had as a kid. What did you enjoy most?
I suppose growing up, I enjoyed singing, and I was quite good at it. And, well, I say so. I was quite good at it. And, I liked acting as well. I suppose when I look back on it now, I suppose acting, it was a great release because it gave you an opportunity to be somebody else, which was great fun. Later on, much later on, for some reason, I developed this belief that I was good at sport, or what I believed was that I was fast. And actually, at the time that I started to believe it, I wasn't actually fast at all, but I worked very hard at it and became fast. So, it just shows you that if you apply your mind to these things, sometimes it actually happens.
The things that you're saying here sound like you had quite a few strengths. Did you realize that you had those strengths?
It's funny. It's a really interesting question, actually, because I didn't realize that until I was about 15, and I did some kind of test, which was to try and help us work out what careers we could possibly be good at. And one of the things that came through in the test was the fact that I had a very, very strong inner confidence, but that it wasn't an outward confidence, that I believed strongly in myself, even if others didn't. So that had been the first time that I'd ever been pointed out to me. I certainly hadn't even been aware of it. When I was younger, especially very young, I had a real difficulty with my temper. First of all, I would be quick to cry, and then I would get aggressive. Now, when I look back on those times, I was probably still below the kind of threshold that any child would be necessarily diagnosed with autism or ADHD. There was also a lot of that kind of stuff, a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know about at the time. And, laterally, or some years after some of that was happening, some kids were being diagnosed as hyperactive. Mm-hmm. I think probably even if I had been diagnosed autistic much younger age, I could have potentially been institutionalized because that kind of thing was still taking place in this country because of the fact that they didn't know what to do with autistic children and adults. And we were just kind of all lumped in together with all sorts of different people with all sorts of different needs. So, I mean, I suppose in some respects I can, I'm blessed that it wasn't picked up, although that's obviously not the positive way you need to look at things. So I got bullied because I was someone that got upset very easily. And so I was an easy target because people knew I would get upset. And I guess I was an easy mark. Oh, I know, we'll just have a go at him and he'll be in tears before we know it. And we can all have a good laugh at that. I was young for my year when I went to school. So I was 4 when I went to school because I was a February birthday. And if you were born in the March, then you would wait another year until you started primary, as we call it here. Also, I was very small for my year. So I was young, small, and not very good at standing up for myself or managing my temper. So all those bits kind of contributed to me being able to not really kind of handle myself. And I guess I probably wasn't, because I wasn't good at sport. I think sport has that ability of, I don't know how to put it exactly. It just suddenly makes you more popular naturally. Right. I joined a choir when I was 8, like external to school. So it was a cathedral choir, St Mary's Cathedral, Episcopalian Cathedral in Edinburgh. that actually opened me up to more ridicule because of the fact that, I sang. So when I was at high school, I sang a solo in my kind of pre-puberty voice and found myself getting verbally abused by lots of different kids from age 12 to 18 because of my treble voice. And I think also, unfortunately, parents didn't know any better. There were just a lot of lack of awareness, and that awareness is now being taught better in schools, and parents are more aware. I think there's just a general understanding that kids are all different. Well, there's kind of two turning points, I suppose, that around about the age of 12, 13, probably not long after I sang in front of the whole school and was, teased about that mercilessly, I started to act out more. I mean, I had been getting into trouble and, getting detentions on a Saturday. Then I swore at a couple of teachers. I had got my brother had brought these kind of bangers over from France, which you can light and they just bang. I don't know firecrackers kind of thing. I had been kind of blowing them up in school, and I got threatened with suspension, which was like a kind of temporary exclusion from the school for maybe like a week. That didn't actually happen, but I just got a lot more detentions. And that, was causing quite a lot of ripples. And then my mum and dad gave me an opportunity to change schools. And also, because they felt that this might benefit me a great deal, that I actually get a chance to repeat the year. So I left one school age 13 and started the other school age 13, but started the year that I had just done again. And that was actually a really great opportunity. The thing is, it's slightly bizarre, but they gave me an opportunity to actually go to a boarding school. I know not everybody gets this chance. In fact, obviously, a majority of people don't get that chance. What was particularly good about it for me was that although we lived in Edinburgh, to go to a boarding school, I was going to be going to a boarding school in Edinburgh, but it meant that I was going to be at home because home life had become pretty intolerable as well. So I went to a boarding school in the same city that my parents lived in. Right. And so suddenly I was given an opportunity to do things, to have a kind of reframe, to try things that I'd never had a chance to do before, possibly to even slightly reinvent myself. Now, I appreciate not everybody gets that, so I was very lucky in that respect, and I'll always be grateful for that. The high school that I left, my brother ended up being head boy there. And I'm sure that had I stayed, that might not have happened, just because I was getting into trouble all the time. I think that, I'm a parent, and, I know my son easily has the propensity or the capacity to misbehave, and I will try to be as pragmatic as I can be with him growing up about, breaking rules and trying to not get upset about it. I know that my father himself got into trouble quite a bit growing up. It's a convenient truth that I have a chromodiversity, and therefore that you can pin my learning differences or neurodevelopmental differences on my XYY. But, it doesn't necessarily mean that the autism, for example, has only come from there. It could have come from somewhere else. It could have come from my father, and statistically has a much greater chance of that.
Yes.
But he's in his early 80s, and there's absolutely no chance that he'll ever try and find that out. I think parents are much better informed now. And even when they're not, they still have the opportunity to be.
What would you say if you could speak to yourself in imagination as a child today from your standpoint? What would you say to yourself as a child?
One film that always stuck with me that I saw I've seen it probably 50 times at least in my 20s and 30s is Good Will Hunting. And Matt Damon is playing the kind of mathematical genius. Mm-hmm. At one point in my life, I was getting a lot of hassle at home. I was getting bullied by my peers, and I was even getting bullied by my teacher. and at school, physically bullied by him as well. It was unbelievable. Well, pardon my French, shitstorm. And anyway, in Good Will Hunting, at the end, when Robin Williams is, kind of finishing the counselling sessions, he keeps saying, "It's not your fault," and that always speaks to me because for a long time I believed that everything was my fault, and it crushed me. But as you say, also helped me build resilience, because I refused to be crushed.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this exclusive conversation with Ric Clark about his lived experience growing up with chromodiversity. As you just heard, Ric discovered he had a 47th Y chromosome at the age of 39, which in hindsight shed new light both on some of the challenges he faced and strengths he developed as a child. Tune in to next week's episodes to hear the second part of our conversation. Ric will talk about his teen years, adopting his own child as an adult, and share key insights for other parents and individuals faced with chromodiversity. The episode ends with a special treat as Ric answers a surprise, unexpectedly revealing quiz.